Good afternoon, Krakow. Can you hear me? I think, yes, it's okay. How many of you are familiar with creating single-page applications? Raise your hands. Not bad. And how many of you had to create application but without working API? Not bad. I had to, so this is my talk. My name is Kamil Zasada, and I am senior software developer and front-end team leader at PGS Software in Wrocław. About 2 years ago, I faced the task of creating scalable architecture for single-page application, which will retrieve data from RESTful API. As a best front-end framework, I chose Angular framework. Yes, nothing special. At that time, what was unusual for me was the fact I had to start writing application without working API. Working on API started a couple weeks after, but even today we experience situation that we want to show something, some working future parts of application, but without complex backend implementation. I started to think how we can deliver this kind of application. The simplest way for providing data to front-end application is getting this data from JSON files storing inside project directory. We used Angular HTTP service to get data from this file in the same way as using RESTful API. But it worked only for GET requests. So I started to find way how I can mock each HTTP method such as put, post, delete, and so on. And I found deployed. This is a command line tool which can create a Mongo database for us and expose methods for manipulating these created data collections. We get a simple RESTful API for putting new records to the database, updating this data, deleting records, and so on. I really recommend to look at this tool. But in the course of time, we realized that more important for us is not only mocking the data, but also designing API. Deployed allows us to modify automatically created endpoints, but it requires some deep knowledge about this tool. Also, storing API project inside code repository was problematic, and what is worth to add is we didn't have any documentation for this API. So we ended up with something we called mocked API, but it wasn't a good example of RESTful API. So I realized that we did something wrong, and we shouldn't start from implementing front-end application and trying to mock API somehow, but we should start from API itself, and this method called API first. In this approach, the key to success is API contract. This is an agreement between front-end and back-end parts of application about data structure and available methods. So having this contract described, front-end developers can start implementation of front-end application. Back-end developers have a reference to their implementation, and also testers can benefit from this because when the API contract is established, they can start writing unit tests. Having this goal in mind, I started to find a tool which can be easy to use, can be used by each team member, and it will put API on the first place in the whole development process. I made a research, and it turned out that for our needs, the best choice was RAML. RAML stands for RESTful API Modeling Language. It's a user-friendly format based on YAML language to design RESTful API. In our company, in order to agree API contracts in other projects, we were using natural language to describe these contracts, and we writing down everything in Jira or Confluence. The format was different in each project, but now RAM became a standard for us. This is not only standard for us, also Spotify uses RAM to describe their public API. So let's check how we can design API, RESTful API in RAML. Let's imagine we have to create an API for application for managing attendees of this conference. So our base resource will be attendee, and we will have a couple of methods for manipulating this attendee object. So we will have methods for getting list of attendees, adding new attendee, updating a single attendee, and so on. So this is much about describing API in natural language. Let's check how we can do this in RAML. On the top, we have a required statement about used RAML version. This is the newest version of RAML. We have a title of our API and other basic information such as version, base URI, and also the type of response and request bodies. Then we had to specify the type of the data which we'll having in our API. We can do this by data types. This is a new feature in RAML, and here we have defined attendee type, which with properties ID, name, and email. Then we can go to defining resources. In our application, we will have two types of resources, the attendees and also the single attendee. Attendees is a top-level resource, and resource ID represents nested resource, represents a single attendee of this conference. We also have a couple methods to operate on that. I think this description is more friendly than user language, and everybody knows what these methods can do. So let's focus on the get method, and we can add some description, some helpful description, and you can also define details of the response of this request. So the response has a status 200. This is a OK status, and I also define the type of the response, and this is the type of the attendee. I can also add some example, and RAML allows us to include some external files with dummy data. In here, file example.json has a dummy list of conference attendees. And another good feature of RAML are traits. I think this is the best one for me. With traits, you can extract some reusable patterns in your API. And here in this example, I specified query parameters for request for resources that can be paginated. So in my example, list of attendees can be paginated. So I defined that this resource is paginated with the is keyword. So we have a simple API described, and this description is our reference for front-end developers and also for back-end developers. But what can we do more with this RAM file, with this simple description? We can run mocking server. Here I have running mocking server on port 3000. And this running API has a resource project and a method get. And this get method returns a list of projects. We can also generate a documentation for our API. And this is documentation is a quick way for both front-end and back-end developers to check available methods on this API. Because the RAML 1.0 is a new version, there isn't any tool for creating documentation for this specification, so I started writing my own. And this tool called RAML, this is in alpha stage. Currently, I'm working on unit tests and checking if everything is okay. I'm cooperating with RAML team, and I would like in couple next weeks release the final version of this tool. I would like to warn you, this can be unstable and there are some bugs, but I'm also waiting for suggestions from you about which parts of documentation should be added to this tool? Which parts of API documentation are important for you? So I'm waiting for some feedback. So to summarize, what is the recipe to user-friendly API? In my opinion, you should start from establishing the API contract at the very beginning of your project. Extract reusable patterns in your API so you don't repeat yourself. Don't treat your API as an addition of your work. Treat your API as a product of your work. And document your API, especially if it's available to public. Thank you very much. If you will have some question, you can email me or catch after the presentation. Thank you.